So to kind of sum up from where Leona was talking, what we say at NEARS and what we've known for a long time is that nuclear power is dirty, dangerous, expensive, and slow, and the entire nuclear fuel chain is rooted in environmental racism and human rights violations. Um, and when we talk about options to save the climate, we have to have really good reasons to pursue technologies that aren't sustainable and that aren't clean, and nuclear power fails all of those tests. We have a long history with nuclear energy and nuclear technology in the state of New York. We've been harmed by it and polluted by it for over 80 years, going back to the Manhattan Project. New York has had 79 Manhattan Project sites. It's the most of any state in the country. And uranium that was mined in the Navajo Nation and in other places was brought to New York and processed here and contaminated communities here before being sent off, for further work in the nuclear weapons program. But just through the years, we operated Indian Point 1, the first reactor in the first commercial reactor in the state for 12 years with no backup cooling systems. The West Valley nuclear reprocessing site contaminated much of the Western New York and Central New York regions. We've had accidents and near accidents at most of the commercial nuclear power plants in New York, including Ginna, Indian Point, 9 Mile Point, and Fitzpatrick. And our communities have been suffering with radioactive pollution and sickness from all these things, and as well as accidental leaks and spills and illegal dumping. But we've also suffered a political, a democratic cost of this, which is the regulatory and political capture of our communities and our state by this industry. We've also been forced to bail out the nuclear industry in New York at least 8 times, at least once every decade since the 1970s. And this is just sort of a listing of those. But the ones that are the most current are the three that have actually taken place just in the last decade, costing billions and billions of dollars. Where I am in central New York, we have been dealing with nuclear technology since the mid 1960s. It's now 60 years since they started construction of the 9 Mile Point 1 reactor. And they didn't tell the people in Oswego County that they were building a nuclear power plant back then. They weren't required by the licensing process for nuclear reactors to do that kind of community engagement. All Niagara Mohawk said was that we're building a power plant, and the community didn't know it was a nuclear power plant until they were already into construction. This is me holding a sort of a blown up postcard that the nuclear power plant used to put out, but with highlights of a lot of the various problems and accidents and issues that affect the community from that site. You can see 9 Mile 1 and 2, they're in the bottom part, and then the Fitzpatrick reactor is the red structure up toward more towards the top on the shore of the lake. But to kind of get to where we are with the governor's proposals, the U.S. has one of the oldest nuclear energy industries in the world. As you can see, we have the average age of nuclear power plants in this country is over 40 years, and in fact, New York has two of the three oldest nuclear reactors operating in the world that are now 56 years old this year. What happened is that when they started building nuclear power plants in the 1970s, they rapidly became way too expensive. They would cost way more than they were projected to cost when they started building them, and it took way longer. And so you ended up with utilities having to start to be bailed out, as I laid out in that previous slide. New York was a poster child for this. We had two of the most expensive reactors ever built in the world in the 1980s. And we had to bail those reactors out as ratepayers. So nuclear construction stopped basically by the 1980s, 1990s, and it was 20 years before the industry decided it was ready to make a comeback. And so, with billions of dollars in subsidies and financing from the federal government 20 years ago, they launched what they called a nuclear renaissance. And there was a lot of fervor, but to put it in context, we were suffering from massively skyrocketing prices for gas and electricity at that time, and so it made it look like nuclear energy was going to be, it was going to be affordable, and it wasn't. The nuclear industry ordered 30 new reactors. They actually got licenses to build 14 of them. but only 4 ever started construction. And the construction of those 4 reactors bankrupted Westinghouse, which is the largest nuclear corporation in the world historically. And 2 of those were canceled. Only the 2 that were completed, the second one last year, cost over $36 billion. They were over $23 billion over budget. But ultimately the cancellation rate of new reactors under the nuclear renaissance was over 93%. So that put the industry in a bit of a crisis. The existing reactors are all getting old, and can't last forever, and they can't build new ones. And so there was a fervor that was sort of ginned up about advanced nuclear, and that's what the governor is proposing now. But what is advanced nuclear? There's no consistent definition. It applies broadly to many different types of nuclear reactors, including more modern versions of the large light water reactors that we have here in New York State and around the country. But it also includes things like what they call small modular reactors that, can either be also light water reactors, or they can use something, even more dangerous substances like liquid sodium and molten salt as the coolant, what they call non-light water reactors. There are other types of non-light water reactors that count as advanced, that are smaller than our current reactors, but not modular. And there's also a different technology called microreactors, which in fact is what's being promoted by this crypto mining company out near Buffalo. But the status of these things is that they're going nowhere. No SMRs or advanced reactor designs have been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There was one that was partially approved several years ago, but that design was abandoned by the time that it was approved. And even demonstration projects for these reactors are already years delayed and years away from construction. So, the idea that we're ready to start building new reactors of any kind in New York is really just fanciful at this point. But the reality is the cost of these new types of reactors is already skyrocketing. You can see here within this chart on the left, that's the way that the costs escalated with the Vogtle reactors in Georgia that I mentioned before were just completed. But the small modular reactors, they haven't even started construction yet, and their costs are already skyrocketing to the same levels at which Vogtle was completed. Which means that once they start constructing these things, they're going to be even more expensive than that. Which is to say that we can't afford to build these things. No one's going to build them unless the ratepayers or the taxpayers are the ones footing the bill. But what we've heard recently in the last few months is a lot of announcements by the tech industry that they're getting into business with nuclear. And it's, but I think the important things to know about these announcements from Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Facebook and whatnot, only one of these companies is making any kind of real investment in nuclear energy at all right now. All of these, and what they're very clear about is that all of these arrangements to build nuclear power plants for data centers are contingent on the industry getting its cost down and on the government, what they're saying, de-risking the costs on these projects, which means bailouts from taxpayers. And that's and at an industry conference today, where NYSERDA President Doreen Harris was one of the featured speakers. They made that clear on many occasions today that building nuclear power plants is going to require government bailouts. And I think to just sort of bring it home, one of the things that Doreen Harris said today, which was really interesting, was she first reminded the crowd that NYSERDA used to have a different name. It was the New York State Atomic and Space Authority. And she said that it looks like NYSERDA's mission is coming full circle. And she also made it clear that what she said is that the New York State is taking an assertive posture towards nuclear power. With that, I'll wrap it up.